Hello, my friends. Came in a little late today. Just getting it going. Some housekeeping stuff. Thank you guys for the kind messages. Just had some family stuff, some personal stuff last week, so I had to switch out last minute. So I appreciate all the messages. I think we're going to be caught up on the YouTube and the podcast starting next week. So let me get John on here. Come on here, and I'll continue that thought. Waiting for John. What's up, buddy? Ooh, the hat is going crazy. I love it. I was just saying...
yeah, keep going on your thing.
Just saying, so I think we're up to episode 20 on the podcast and on the YouTube, getting the full episodes archived for people. So people that like listening to audio versions rather than going to IGTV, we've got them on the YouTube as well. All the clips are on LiveWithMattRad and the YouTube page as well. And so I think starting next week, fingers crossed, we're going to basically try to do the lives on Tuesday, and then by Wednesday have the audio podcast version up and the full episode up on YouTube, so people can quickly check out their
all caught up
format of choice. Yeah, we got lots and lots of clips coming to over on the Live with Matt Rad. I know people are finding that useful. Different clips on all kinds of topics. We're starting to get questions that I have clips for. So when people send questions, I go, we'll try to talk about it again, but also check out this clip. We talked about it already.
Yeah, sick. I love that.
And I know you and I have talked about this a little bit. We've done a few of them doing whole episodes on a single topic. If people want to just hit us up and give us suggestions, I mean, we've done finishing, we've done gain staging, we've done like harmonics and saturation, things like that. We could do a whole like series of live streams for a year on low end. I could talk about low end forever and ever. It's my favorite thing in the whole world.
Me too.
Low end, maybe about mastering. We did finishing. So people hit us up. What would be useful for us to go deep into?
Yeah.
I think that would be a fun thing to do.
Josh?
How are you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired this week. Last week was a lot, as it was for you as well. We both had things that we were taking care of, family wise. Yeah. Coincidence that worked out on the same day and week. So I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
But I'm all right. I mean, I'm back to it. I was working up until this minute. Went for a bike ride this morning.
Nice.
My toe has finally, I think, healed. After breaking it playing soccer. So
I didn't know you broke it playing soccer. You didn't tell me that.
Yeah, I broke my pinky toe playing soccer after a bunch of champagne with a 9-year-old. It was a lot of fun.
The champagne is not with the 9-year-old.
No,
right?
No, the champagne was with the families, and then we played soccer. And it was a lot of fun and worth it. But I got on the bike for the first time this morning, and it feels good. So
that's great, man.
Getting back to the normal routine.
On that same note, when I was up in Oakland this weekend seeing family, I sprinted hills for the first time in like 6 weeks. So I don't have a good hill near my new place. And I realized it's the best thing in the universe for exercise. I recommend that to all of you if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I jumped back into work today. Like last week, I didn't do almost any work. I think I got through 1 or 2 songs because I was at the hospital most of the time. Yeah. And then this week, I'm kind of back on it. I did 3 yesterday and did notes on them today. And like, it felt really good to be back, and the bike ride helps. So nice,
man. Hey, what's up, Canada, in the chat there?
What up, Canada?
I love that there's people from all over the world.
Oh.
Yeah, what was the Coco photo? I don't know if those hats are allowed in Canada. I think that's a great hat, man. I really like it. I keep freezing.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? What should we talk about today?
Yeah, there's lots of questions. There's questions, sort of 2 weeks worth of questions. I think a lot of them, if we don't get your question, I'm gonna hit people up directly. Just DM folks back. Cool. So a lot of questions. There's some fun topics. So on some sort of basics, which I like this topic because I think it's an interesting. There's a lot of ways to talk about it, but the difference between treating, mixing organic sounds versus synthetic sounds. I think a lot of people are used to. There's a lot of people, it seems like, who are recording organic instruments for the first time, because most people start out these days by just being on their laptop, using loops, using splice, using soft synths, and even, organic sounds, quote unquote, organic sounds like piano samples and things like that, which are not really organic sounds, of course, you don't actually have to record them. So there are a number of questions, which I'm going to hit some people back on DMs about. I have one condenser and one dynamic. What do I use to mic what? I'll hit some of those people back, but
I have an overall theory on this that
go for it.
I've been practicing for the last 15 years. I feel like I've been doing this thought process the entire time, and I think it's been dubbed upon me where people call it out. And if I have a style, this would probably fit in that style, which would be I tend to always treat organic instruments synthetically and synthetic instruments organically. And what I mean by that is if there's a synth that's in the box, I try to take it out of the box with some processing with my tubes, or I think more organically about that sound. For example, like a buzzy in the box synth that has all the way up to like 30K in its filter, not like a vintage Prophet or a Juno that cuts off at 15K by default. Anything with that faux top end that's just like non-existent in the human ear in general, I tend to try to warm up with the analog thought. Doesn't mean I only use outboard gear. I do it most of the time now because I have it, but it was just always a thought process that I would go through and try to warm up these sounds. And the opposite is, if you give me a Bob Dylan sounding acoustic guitar, I'm going to try to bring as much life out of that in a modern realm and try to make it sound less like it was in the 60s or 70s, and try to push it to, well, what does acoustic guitar sound like now? Like maybe there's a bit more kind of mid-range in that 1.5 to 2K and kind of that like less jangle up top and Taylor sound of Nashville records, and a bit more like what would happen in a Kanye record, and how would I treat that kind of thing. So it's kind of an overall processing of the reverse, and I've been doing it since I can remember, because I was always recording my first studio in Long Island, starting to do indie bands and then going into pop. I'd use only organic instruments to try to make pop records out of samples and sounds and loops that I recorded. And if it was a synth, it was like a real Juno, or it's a real something, real, whatever that means. It's not software. And I would always try to think about this way reversely. So I have an overall theory on that, and it seems to, I think I talk about it in a few interviews, and I talked about it at ASCAP, and it's a specific way of thought. And
that's a really, I think about it almost exactly the same way, because I grew up, I'm 36, so I grew up and learned how to record just before there was really ubiquitous computer recording. I mean, I guess, Nirvana Nevermind was done on Pro Tools. But of course I didn't have the money for that sort of studio. That's early 90s. That's right when I started like recording my garage band. And so what I was garage band, an actual band in a garage, not the program. And so I didn't get a laptop until I was probably 17 or 18, I think, when I was going to college. And then I started using Cubase. But up until that point, it was figuring out how to make things make organic instruments being recorded sound the most exciting. And then working with Eric Valentine for years is very much about how to take rock instruments. You listen to like All American Rejects Gives You Hell. It sounds very organic, but it sounds tight, in your face, huge.
Sounds larger than life.
Sounds incredible. And so I learned a lot about how to take organic instruments and use compression, EQ, distortion, lots of tricks for getting transients to pop out. How do you, mult a snare drum mic and smash one of them and then compress it so you get that little tick and transient design so you get that little tick to add back into the main sound, so it has that, so it can compete with electronic records and hip hop records and very processed records.
Exactly. That's why you want those types of records to compete, whether it's on the radio or a playlist. You want it to compete next to a hip hop record that's all synthetic based sounds, right?
And then,
you have to, I mean, there's art, and there's that far left of, I don't really care how it competes in that thought process. I just don't exist there, because I'm always trying to make something sound competitive, so you can maximize the potential results of its success, no matter where you are, whether you're top 40 or alternative R&B, or just something that it doesn't have to be down the middle for that, but sonically it should be able to compete. So if it comes on in a restaurant next to something on XM radio, or however it's being digested, it competes. And that's kind of the word that I'm always, and granted that's a deeper thing inside of me where I'm overly competitive about everything in general, but I want everything to compete. And that means you can't just be like, oh, I'm making a 1950s record. It's like, well, you're going to have no low end in your mix. Like, cool, guys.
That's a big part of, I want to finish a thought about it, but just as a tangent real quick, that's a big part of your job as a mixer finisher, is to take a diverse set of styles and ideas from different artists, but let them all sit enough in the same place so that it doesn't sound strange when it comes on. You want something to sound unique and interesting, but you don't want it to sound weak or wimpy or confusing in some way, or the vocal isn't present, or, these sort of things that there are standards of the way records sound in 2020 that are different than 2010, different than 1970, different than whatever. The other thing we're saying, talking about organic versus synthetic sounds, what happened in sort of like the late 2000s when the European house music sound, dance music sound started to come to the US, and all of a sudden Katy Perry records and Pink records were these 128 BPM, lots and lots of samples, like the stuff that Benny and Shellback were doing, Moves Like Jagger, these sort of records that are very much in the style of like European dance records from the decade before that, so like Robin records and things like that. All of a sudden, everybody had the technology and the samples to make things sound as exciting as possible. So then the last 10 years, from like 2010 till now, has really been about, okay, how do you balance the things that feel real and organic with the things that feel synthetic? If everybody's making records in computers, instead of doing the thing that I learned how to do, which was take organic instruments and make them sound really clean and powerful and in your face, you're now taking sounds that are automatically clean and powerful in your face. And so how do you treat them the other way? And that's the thing you're talking about, where, learning about things like harmonics and saturation and a little bit about recording technology history, you can start, you don't have to be a historian, but understanding that, tape machines and filters and old technology used to affect sounds in certain ways. So you can take these very clean sounds and then treat them a little dirtier to blend them in. So kind of going the opposite direction on each of them is a great approach. I like that answer a lot.
Yeah, let's move on. I think we covered it.
Theo asked, would you consider doing a live streamed mix?
I don't necessarily know. I mean, Josh Goodwin was just on. He just started doing that. Alex Toomey does that. I actually don't know protocol on how to do that. I think it'd be very disappointing for people. I think I'm pretty boring to watch mix. And I don't talk while I do it. So there would be less. I don't know how informative it would be. Maybe it would be. And I'm just cynical towards myself. But yes, the answer is yes. I'd like to do it. In the works. And I have other things like doing this with you and conversations that I think are a little bit more beneficial in the way we talk about things than showing someone how I mix. Because then people are going to start copying that. I'm not sure that's like the best way forward, because I'm still learning and practicing. Like, for example, I'm super on a new way of thinking about mixing right now. That's very different to how I've been for 15 years, which I'm what's the word I'm looking for? I'm more additive right now. I'm mostly a subtractive mixer. And right now I'm practicing using one specific tool on how to be additive. So I could show that, but that's something that I've only been doing for 3 weeks. So I don't even know if that's something that's going to land necessarily in my style. So I'm constantly kind of shifting my approach. Sometimes I mix a song in less than an hour. Like, y'all are going to be like, oh, he only spends an hour on a mix. Like, I don't really need that feedback right now. I'm still trying to like find my zone, as we all are. So I don't know how beneficial a live mix stream from me would be versus someone with a little bit more experience than I guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. It's something that obviously you and I have talked about. We've talked about on the streams. What is valuable to people? And I think part of that is getting feedback from people about what they would want to see. And then part of that is us saying, hey, we want to do a different thing deliberately because we think that would be valuable for people, that they may not understand it. And I think, one of the things that I realized, and you and I have talked about, is there's a lot of people giving a lot of tips. And I actually haven't watched the live streams yet. I know Josh is mixing All Day's record. All Day is a good friend of mine, and I love his music. I've heard some of the stuff on the EP before it went to mix. It's really cool stuff. So I may check one of those out. I know he did one last night. I assume he's doing it every night. But I also, because there's a lot out there, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people talking about the why and the philosophy, and also just sort of like the communal aspect. For whatever reason, I think that appeals more to me, and I know it appeals a lot to you with the conversation stuff, and obviously with these streams. So, you know, if maybe you do a stream at some point, maybe I do a stream. There's been some talk about doing something on Twitch, but I also think that there's lots of good, you know, trying to take the workflow that we have is fine, but there's a lot of people showing great workflows that I find interesting, but I think it's a better use of our time to have these conversations. And I also enjoy this. I like talking rather than just like streaming and clicking a bunch of things.
But just going into the technique that I'm practicing now, just to be candid about it, because I mean, I'm doing it this morning, and I'm a really subtractive mixer. So people like, I try to have enough energy in certain areas of dirt that feel exciting. I don't want it to be too sterile. I'm not trying to like, actually I should just pause before I say what I was about to say. I'm trying to mix in genres that require energy and grit, but also transparency and clarity. So I'm usually subtractive for that nature. And some people might be like, oh, it's a little warm. It's a warm aesthetic. It's a little darker than what I'm used to. It's like, well, I mean, it depends on how you're listening to it. Are you you might have to turn the volume knob up one click for a mix of mine that's slightly warmer, so it gives more headroom to turn it up, like records in the early 2000s did in R&B. They were really warm, so you can crank them in the car when you're driving and it feels good. Like my mixes tend to be able to go a little bit louder on the volume of a stereo than others because of the warmth. So to me, it's not a dark mix. It's just a little bit warmer. So, but now recently I've been super subtractive, but I found a really unique tool that I like. That's a multi-band saturator, and it's more like an EQ in a sense where there's no crossover points. It's not an exciter, and it's not like a multi-band compressor. So there's no phase coherency issues between bands. So I'm being additive with that, like an EQ, but it's a saturator and has 10 or 12 different forms of saturation in 5 different bands, like an EQ. So it has a shelf on the top and bottom, and then 3 bells in the middle. And and it has its limitations, meaning like it's not like the Pro Q3 where you can just go anywhere you want. So you kind of have this really classic 5-band EQ style parametric saturator. That's what I'll call it. It's a parametric additive only saturator, right? There's no
what is the plugin?
There's no reduction. It's called Spectre by Waves Factory.
Okay.
It's epic. I had a homie over recently that like he wanted to hear a session I was working on. I opened it up and I showed him the plugin. He's like, "How many times are you using it?" I just went down and it's almost on every. Like, I'm not ashamed to say it. It's on everything. Yeah. And it's doing very minimal things. So what I'll do is, let's get really specific. Say I hate 3K in a sound. Like, let's just talk numbers for a second. There's an upper mid-range harmonic issue that I hate. I take it out with an EQ, but I might boost that 2.5 or 2.8 narrowly with this additive saturation in maybe like a warmer mode. So it grabs that and it holds it and it pushes it forward just enough, but underneath or above that dip that was offensive, right? So like really specific, but instead of just EQing, it's making this kind of thick, denser ball that I can push and pull. So someone like today asked for a vocal up. I didn't vocal up. I just took a really broad stroke band on the upper mid range of this, and I added presence, and it was approved. Like, this is not a volume up thing. This is a density up thing. So I tend to mix where the vocal is in the mix until someone asks otherwise, right? So like drums and vocal need to just be grooving together. The minute a vocal is way too loud, it's hard for me to listen to the record because it's just really dense. The groove changes and the vocal is just so loud. It's just not the style of music I necessarily want to put on to listen to, but I understand the utility of it. So I try to find that happy medium, and I get away with it a lot because I love, like, going back to Khalid's talk, like that vocal is so dynamic, but because the arrangement is so minimal, it has so much space to dance around.
Lots of room to breathe. But it's a competitively loud mix that's also dynamic. So it's an approach. And I've realized that for people that want more of that density and more of that, what they're kind of used to, compressed
pop mixes, I can get away with it with this kind of additive saturation instead of adding a compressor or turning the vocal up. So it's a technique to be additive that I'm practicing that is a bit out of the box compared to what is density exactly. Matt Rad has a Live with Matt Rad about density. Yeah, go back. We talked about this for a whole hour. Density in the arrangement, the way frequencies and instruments stack up to create the sonic landscape, the topography, as I like to call it, like from start to finish of the song, how things stack up is the density of the arrangement, like how many parts are there. When you were talking about that, the Benny Blanco, like kind of the Dr. Luke Shellback, that dense Katy Perry sound, that was coming from a lot of parts stacking on top of each other, like 12 versions of the same synth sound.
Right.
Now the density is coming from maybe like 8 instruments. Like it's only from a sample, an 808, the drums, and that's making the density. Where's the density coming from? They're equally as dense in different ways. Sometimes you populate the density of a record in the low mids or the low end, depending on the genre. So you're constantly changing or where the density is depending on genre, but you need a certain density to compete next to other genres. You just have to decide where you're going to put it. So that's what I think additively.
The two traditional ways to get density are more parts and compression distortion. And compression distortion can be distinct, and that's one of the things that you and I talk about. We have a number of lives all about this, about harmonic saturation and density. So please check that out. I think it's number 8 or so. We did a whole hour on harmonics, but the idea that you can make something sound thicker without necessarily sounding louder, or you can make something sound thicker without necessarily compressing or using a compressor or adding doubles to it. Doubles or triples or more parts. And that idea of making something sound richer without making it louder is sort of the magic thing that you're always after.
That's what I'm trying. That's what I'm after. Yeah, exactly. Also not being quiet, right? So it has to be, again, be competitive, right? Down for the thickness.
Damn, everybody making good thick jokes in the comments. So how does, I had a quick question. How does that, it's called Spectre, the plugin you're talking about, the new one that you're liking. How do they get away with not having phase issues?
There's no crossover. It's an EQ. It looks like an EQ. So the bands don't cross. You can't yes, if you cross bands, then yes, you'll have phasing issues, but you can use them independently of each other versus if you have a Pro MB, you see the crossover points. Like that's happening it's visual, you can see. And on either side of that, there's a phase shift that's happening. To my ear, it is doing nothing like what Pro MB or like I use Ozone's Exciter a lot, Ozone 9's Exciter. And when you instantiate a band, like I could hear punchiness go away if I'm in the low end. Like you can hear where the phasing out is happening in low end. So I have to be really specific on when I use either of these tools, because I think like an Exciter is better in the upper mids and mid range where you don't notice the punchiness going away as much as in low end where you want that thump and that hit to happen. Even in a bass or a synth or something that you want to maintain transients. I've just noticed that this has less of what I notice from these other tools, like the cost benefit, the risk reward, in a sense. You
can do more and maintain the sort of phase clarity.
Yeah, to my ear, again, that's how I hear it. And again, being additive is new for me. And I like being additive this way than an EQ. It sounds more dynamic to me. So when you're energizing that upper mid range, it's allowing it to be dynamic. So, I mean, as depending on the level of experience here, when you take an EQ and you turn it up in a frequency range, right, you're turning up that frequency always. Well, I don't always want that frequency to be louder on most sounds. I want it to be dynamic. So now we have dynamic EQs that do that, like a compressor with a threshold. Anytime I'm reducing, I'm like 99% of the time it's a dynamic reduction. Because what if you only want to control a peak at 400 hertz, right?
That's a big tip right there.
I don't want to take out the low mids when the piano player is playing up high, because that's going to add that lower harmonic thickness to pop through. But when it gets a little muddy in the low mids, when he's playing in the middle of the thing, in the keyboard, I want that to be controlled. So I don't just take out frequencies unless it's like a really weird overtone and like in a bad mic recording or something, then maybe I'll do like a sharp dip. That's really rare. But what I'm noticing about doing this with saturation tools is that it has that dynamic. So if I'm not compressing the vocal, as people that watch this regularly know, I don't compress vocals. As it hits that saturation in that upper mid, it's only energizing and hitting that more when it's dynamic and pushing into it. So that's why I think I tend to like this, because it glues it. So anyway, that's a little.
So you're basically figuring out how to get the same effect in reverse. When you're cutting and you're using a dynamic. So it's funny that you say that, because I've started doing that a lot more, and it may be influenced by these talks, but I don't know if you've ever talked about that before. But instead of
I don't think so.
EQing things out, I'm using a lot more dynamic EQ reduction, and I just use the Pro Q3. Do you have better tools than that?
I use that most of the time. If you want to get super geeky, the Ozone dynamic EQ is better only because, and I hope Pro Q4 will fix this or add this function, but you can control the attack and release like a compressor in the EQ. But Pro Q3 is more user-friendly and easier to use. So, and it has an auto threshold match that is really good. But if I really want to get specific and kind of low mid or low, say I'm fucking with an 808 and I want to reduce like 120 to 200 hertz, that's a really sensitive area. Like sometimes you want those notes to come through on upper harmonic, like octave. Instead of splitting it to different channels, I get lazy sometimes. I don't like to split 808 notes a lot. I'm just just lost my train of thought. Oh, so I'll go use like a faster attack on certain notes, on certain harmonic regions in that versus the Pro Q3. But I normally use the Pro Q3. It's a one size fits all in a lot of ways.
So I'm going to try to explain it because it'll help me understand and maybe help other people too. Instead of just reducing on an EQ, because a lot of sounds are so dynamic. The piano is a great example. Of vocals, another great example. Somebody singing lower in the range than singing higher. Instead of reducing some boominess in their vocal, you find where that frequency range is and use a little dynamic EQ so that when they're singing higher, it's not going to be affected nearly as much. But when it's lower and a little boomy, it cuts it out. That's a really great tip. And so you've been finding this plugin Spectre for doing a version of harmonic saturation and density adding in the opposite direction, where when it hits it dynamically for a boost, you get a little extra density, but it's not overwhelming it.
Yeah, I did it on Talk. I was doing really specific moves I was trying to fake before a tool like this came, where I was, you know how like, we might have talked about this at one point, but a lot of people, including we like clip gain or automate or ride with a fader back in the day, syllables of words to even out a vocal performance. Yeah. Instead of doing that, I was automating up a saturating plugin or a clipper on Khalid's vocal to get it to sound a little bit more gritty on certain notes. So I was automating like 0.5 bits up to 2 dB bits of saturation.
Oh. I just lost audio. Can you hear me? I don't know. I just lost audio. Can you hear me? I don't know. I just lost you on audio. I can't hear you at all. Can you guys hear us in the chat? I can't hear anything. We lost you, John. We lost John for some reason. Do you want to try to disconnect? Your... John's out here too. Okay. We can hear me, but not you. John, do you want to take out your, see if you can go on to audio. Still no John, disconnect airports. Are you off of the, oh, no, nothing? Dang, this is like the most amazing. You want to try going off and on again? Well, let's try going. I'm going to hit him. Gonna go off live, you guys, and try to go back on. Maybe John can go off and then come back on. John, go off live and come back on. Okay, now he's just disappeared forever. That's a really good set of tips he's talking about. I definitely have started doing that with reduction in my mixes, but for boosting, it's a really interesting tip. Let's see if we can get him back on in a second. John just left, so he'll come back. Let me see. There's some other good questions here. I'll do some more production stuff real quick. Ed, actually, I like this one. John's gonna want this one too. So maybe we can get him back on for there's a meditation conversation. Zach asked about people talking about professional sounding mixes. Let's see. John, go live with John. Let's see. We got John. R.I.P. I was so engaged. I know. Nadim, it was so good, right? Oh wait, I hear you.
Weird. That was weird.
You were in the midst. People were loving it. We were talking about things. Do you remember where you were?
No, my manager called me, and even though I'm on Do Not Disturb, it came through, and it broke the live, I guess.
It broke it.
I let him know, because that's rude as fuck.
Bro, I'm live. I'm trying to drop this knowledge.
I just heard you say something about meditation. Let's move to that.
Well, let's see if we can finish these couple of things, and we'll do. There's a few other great questions. Audio's good now. Thanks, guys. Thanks for letting us know in the chat there too. That helped us solve this problem. I wanted to ask, there was somebody asked about, Ethan, since we're talking about transients and saturation, and you're talking about clipping syllables. You were going through. And instead of just doing clip gain, let's do that. And then I have an adjacent question.
It was something I was messing around with because, every once in a while, you think like a Nina Simone record or some classic record that they didn't. I was using the Jst Clipper plugin, kind of mimicking the Fruity Loops clip sound. So using these classic records, and the performer, the singer's digging in, it cracks on a note, like either the mic distorted or the preamp, because they didn't have the tools we have now, but that's character and that's energy. So I was trying to emphasize that, little by little with this Clipper plugin on a soulful performance like Talk. So, and then I don't really know where it came from. It just happened, and now I do it quite a bit. But now I'm doing it not with that plugin. I'm doing it with an exciter or with this Spectre thing where I'm automating these regions. Versus that was automating it's a one knob plugin. When you look it up, you'll see it's just one knob clip. So exactly, lots of Otis Redding, beautiful tape saturation. That's kind of what It's all accidental. That's good. That's the whole reason. But I'm trying to do it intentionally to create, because a lot of performances and a lot of recordings these days come in pretty flat, like whether they're over processed already, and it's that for example, the Talk record did not. I mean, Khalid's emotive as fuck, and he's one of the gems in our R&B world and pop world. Yeah. But so that's the impetus of the idea, and it just kind of came out, and now I do it, and I'm always trying to distill down what I like most from certain techniques and not overdo the technique, and kind of understand all the tools and where they function most. So
this actually, it connects nicely to what we were talking about before, of treating organic sounds versus synthetic sounds, that when you get synthetic sounds or you get heavily, because when you talk about organic versus synthetic or whatever, what you're really talking about is stuff that is either synthetic in that it's like a digital synth, or that's really processed already. Like a lot of drum samples, you don't need to do any compression on a lot of drums because the samples are so compressed. But then adding elements into the song that have some of that clipping, some of that distortion, some of that quote unquote bad sound from how I was trained to engineer and record onto tape machines, and you don't want to clip, you don't want to do that because so many things had natural clipping in it, and you're trying to avoid that stuff. And now it's like just add it everywhere. One of my favorite examples, who I think we could talk about this forever and ever because there's so many amazing, interesting, innovative things he's done. But Kanye's vocals, especially in 808s and Heartbreak, he really found that, and it's a combination of auto-tune and SansAmp and delay
and no reverb.
And reverb,
just dry.
Right, and no reverb, but having that weird delay on it, and the way that they would automate up distortion on certain lines.
Yeah.
It's this very similar effect to what you're talking about. If you want to add a little extra intensity to the end of a line, just crank up the distortion or blend in a distorted.
It's the same theory as like adding a delay throw at the end of a phrase to fill holes, or verb throws, or flangers, or it's the same thought process behind all of it. It's just what needs to be done to seamlessly move to the next line or next section. It's like it's all transitional moves that are just trying to blend together and create a journey and an arc, right? So these are all reasons for that. Exactly. That's a really good point. I mean, automating distortion loudly and boldly is a similar thing. It's the same idea as doing it subtly, to create a little bit of that lean in or pull back. Like, I want the listener to lean in. It's not just given to them all at first listen. Granted, top 40 radio, that's not always going to work, but I have a little bit more faith in humanity, not in attention spans, but in the willingness to listen for detail. Yeah. I think like I just mixed a song that's coming out Friday. Awesome artist. I'm so excited for it to drop.
Awesome.
And it's 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Like, my favorite song on Top 40 right now, Mood, is 2 minutes and 12 seconds, and I ran it 8 times in a row the first time I heard it. Yeah. So it's also the same producer that did that song. So it's like, what? Y'all just sticking around 210, 212, 215. But I love it. So, but within that 2 minutes and 12 seconds, I want to make you listen to more than just one thing. And I want to give you the option on Listen 8 to hear something you haven't heard before. So that's why I do these moves. It might be selfish. Maybe it's just for me. But I think other people can hear that.
I know. I think it's huge. And this is the overlap between producing and mixing, because a lot of people who are producing are doing mixing things, and people who are mixers often are making production decisions. Whatever the overlap, whatever you want to call it, you can put distortion on the end of a line of a vocal and make it really obvious and in your face and exciting.
Yeah.
Or you can do it subtly, where it doesn't feel like a big obvious dynamic change, but you feel it, and you feel a little more intensity. It's like automating up the downbeat of a chorus, where it just hits a little harder.
Exactly.
Where it's not obvious. You're not adding a big boom, a big like vengeance impact or something, but you're adding.
Are those still happening?
Whatever. I mean, things like that, right? There's impacts and things all the time, but maybe you're just automating up a little bit so the chorus just has a little extra punch to it that you'll never notice until you actually, if you're somebody else, you're bringing up somebody else's mix and you see like, oh, there's a little more bump and low end there. Those things are great, whether they're subtle or intentional or deliberate. But yeah, hugely interesting topic. There was a question about, where was it? Oh, Ethan asked about transients, but especially with bass and drums. I know we had talked a lot about transients for high-end transients, for vocals, things like that. And you were talking a minute ago about low-end, about 808s and some harmonics. Any thoughts about low-end and transients or low-end harmonic distortion?
Don't ever, there's very few rules. Don't ever use linear phase EQ when you're filtering low-end. Use linear phase EQ. We've talked about this a lot, just very minimally. Like, don't really if you don't have to, but definitely not in low end. And again, I'll reiterate, I think it's on one of the things you've already released. Check out the Fab Filter. I think it was Pro Q2 demo before the Pro Q3 came out. It's one of those on linear phase, and you won't be able to unhear what you hear. So just look at the demo of what it does in Fab Filter, and you'll never use it again.
This is me taking notes, by the way.
Shout out to the homie Rory for showing it to me and changed my life and how I view linear phase EQ.
Can you give a 30-second thing for what happens there? I mean, people should go watch it. It's when
you put a filter in, instead of hearing like doo doo on a kick, you'll hear It's like obscures transients and adds like a weird reverse effect to it. It's just, you can't unhear it.
When filtering low end.
Yeah, when adding a filter or a bell, mostly on a filter. The demo was on a filter. Just don't use linear phase EQs. So
you're saying linear phase EQs, the idea is that
I watched the video, it fucked me up. Just watch the video. Let's not even talk about it. Well, that's one of those, like, they're going to explain it.
Conceptually,
the reason better than we are.
Yeah, but conceptually, the reason to use a linear phase EQ is because when you're EQing, you're necessarily messing with the phase relationship and surrounding frequencies, and a linear phase EQ will presumably mitigate that somehow so the phase is a little bit cleaner. And anytime you're messing with phase on things, you're losing a little bit of clarity. But you're saying that this demo and using it in low end messes with transients.
Yes. I would argue that the clarity comment on using why you would use a linear phase EQ for many decades, EQs were not linear phase, right? This is happening in software mostly. The phase bump on EQs is what gives the 1073 its sound, and like these classic and these SSLs, like you want the phase shift for the clarity. No one's looking for a sterile EQ move. And then they started making like Sontec and these Maselects, like these mastering EQs were like really reduced latency or no linear phase or really reduced phase. Like, so they were clean for that purpose. So there's a purpose for it in hardware, and I understand that. But what we're talking about is a little bit more specific. But I wouldn't use it in a mastering scenario either, especially on low end. Just like, again, watch the video. But the bandwidth, the Q of it, is what decides how much of that phase bump on the outsides, or phase cut, phase dip, or bump, whatever it's going to be, depending. That's what you want, and that adds the character to the move that you made. So I tend to lean on, if I'm using fad filter, the zero latency or the natural phase sounds pretty cool in the upper stuff if you're being additive. But again, I'm not very EQ additive. Like less than 5% of the time I'm boosting with an EQ. It's not a thing in my repertoire.
Very interesting. And so so you just use a regular EQ or filter to do low end moves?
Yeah, just the regular, Like I like the dangerous Bax EQ a lot. Their filter is tight on a kick drum. That 12 hertz like filter does a little phase pop. That's really tight. I would fuck with that. Someone just wrote a really long comment that I can't read, but I'd like to, about sentence and returns. Either you have a preference or they return. Don't want to talk about that. No preference. Put it wherever you want to put it. Doesn't matter. I did want to talk about summing and the idea of when we're talking about density. I wanted to bring this up because that idea that we were talking about before we got cut off of dynamic EQing low mids out. I don't want them to be cut out when you're up top in a piano or a vocal or something. A lot of people are super reductive in low mids. I think it's because they're mixing in the box. And not saying that mixing in the box can't be great, but what I've noticed is you have to be a lot more reductive in the musical frequencies, as I like to think of them. That's where the harmonics, like the fundamental harmonics of chords, come out in a lot of ways, in order to make, for instance, Pro Tools or Ableton not clip. And a lot of people do it with multi-band compression on their master bus to reduce that area but kind of keep it intact. In multi-band compression in your mix bus, you're doing the same thing with phase. Any crossover point loses transients and loses pop, so it has this smearing effect going on. So what I've noticed about, and I don't think summing is the answer. Actually, I'm an anti-summing box mixer, but I do think coming out of the box and hitting some sort of analog wall, even if the needles don't move on it, gives you that extra juice to keep those musical frequencies intact and not cutting them, or not dramatically cutting them as much, to maintain that density that I'm talking about in the low mids. So I wanted to just touch on that because it has a lot to do with transients and density in a mix. And it kind of, so I think, like, use the tools you have for a time being, but as you get to a certain level of mix engineer, I would experiment with coming out of the box at some point and hitting some wall of flavor that you're interested in.
I like that a lot.
It's a taste thing too. It's not a one size fits all. It's whatever people like.
I've also noticed that I've been trying to do in the new setup, doing lots of my mixing, just finishing things in Ableton, and I'm finding it more difficult than in Pro Tools. I don't know why that is yet.
Oh my God, it's the worst.
But and I know that some of it's just interface, and some of it's just like not interface and like the hardware, but just like the way that I'm interfacing with it. The workflow's a little different, but something about it is not quite gluing. I can't get things to be loud but still dynamic. I'm still playing with that. I'll report back on that. But I'm finding Ableton tough to get really good competitive mixes in.
It's not good.
Yeah, I might.
Not good for that.
If I can avoid the process of printing stems just to bring it into Pro Tools, just to finish in Pro Tools, I'd like to avoid that because Ableton.
I can't wait to hear when the first time you do that. So when I was producing and I was making beats in Ableton, the minute I would stem it out and put it into Pro Tools, it just sounded better. Like
why
even
is that?
The exact export, because I wouldn't produce with anything on my master bus.
Yeah.
Maybe like a vintage limiter from Ozone, like just for like 2 dB, just to send out to someone.
Yeah.
As soon as I put it in with the same limiter on in Pro Tools, I don't know. You could turn it up louder. I know a little bit of why this happens. Like I'd love someone at Ableton to hear this and argue me on it, but the platform is built for stability, right? So it won't crash when you're live. Ableton is built for stability. So when you're live and you're triggering a lot of things, the CPU won't crash. Like Pro Tools would just crash and your whole fucking show would suck. And I'm an avid Pro Tools user. Wow, Avid, the company. That's like not even, that was no pun intended.
Yeah.
But as you work it harder, it's more vulnerable to crashes. Now, with Ableton, what it does is it reduces the sonic quality like you would on Netflix. Like you'd see Netflix, it wouldn't stop the buffering of the video. It would lower the quality of the video. Or YouTube does this automatically depending on your Wi-Fi connection. It doesn't want you to stop seeing or hearing what you're seeing or hearing, but it's going to reduce the quality so it can get through this. And that's what Ableton's doing. So the more stuff you have in Ableton, the smaller it sounds. So when you take, like, say, I mean, it's a CPU number. I remember my friend AJ, like 5 years ago, was like discovering this because he was an EDM producer and using Ableton. And the minute he got above 25% CPU on the meter, he noticed like the kick not punching as hard. He brought this to my attention. And then he would start making smaller stems and trying to stay under 20%. He noticed Ableton sounded really good under 25%. So he kept like making new stems for himself because he was an Ableton finisher. And he kind of found this way. He would notice like the snare wouldn't punch through the density. He'd have to boost, like he'd have to EQ the snare differently as things kept being added, even though nothing was in that frequency. It was really weird, and I heard it with him. So we experimented, just took the full session out of Ableton and put it in Pro Tools, and it just was like, this sounds like you wanted it to sound, and I didn't add anything to it. So I always argue that you should finish everything in Pro Tools, even if you're doing it, mixing it yourself. Just like put it into Pro Tools and mix it.
I'm definitely going to try doing that. It's just an annoying extra step of an hour or two to move things
Alexander,
around.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe you do that only in finishing things. Alexander, I would say I would just push you a little bit different to 200 to 500 areas, kind of what I'm talking about, like the cello frequency in an orchestra. That's that glue range between the bass and the viola, violin, upper harmonics, I would say.
Yeah, I think of it's starting with the body of the snare drum up through, maybe 500 or 600. That's what I think of as low mids. Because once you get into like 600-700, you get into that like horn range, and that's
horn mids. Yeah.
You want to hit some quick ones?
Yeah, we got 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Let's see. Ed asked beginner tips for meditation, apps, podcasts, books. I'd like to go first and just say, I don't think it matters that much. I think you should just start doing it. John and I both like the Sam Harris app, Waking Up, which is like $100 a year. But you can hit them up and say, hey, I can't afford it, and they'll give you a free one for a year. And each year you can just hit them up again and say, I can't afford it. And they'll give it to you for free. It's a great app. It has a great intro course. It has a whole spectrum of things.
Yeah, I would just take what you just said, agree completely, and then say that I think it's for different types of personalities. I think the Headspace and Calm approach is a little bit more repetitive and focused on breath. And the Sam Harris Waking Up is a bit more unpredictable about what he's going to focus on in the practice. It can be really kind of directional and conceptual, or it can be mad moments of silence and just sitting there. So instructional was the word I was actually looking. He like even this morning, he's like, oh, we went a little more instructional today, like after the 10 minutes was up. But Headspace is great. I use Headspace for sleeping meditations because I feel like it's less cerebral than the Sam Harris course is like kind of the morning. You might be, thinking about what's going on a bit more. But I think for personality differences, that they're all usable. I've never used Calm, so I don't know what the Calm is. But Calm, just by the name of it, seems to not gel well with me because you're not meditating to maintain calmness. That's not the intention of meditation. It's to maximize awareness, and whatever the awareness you might not be calm in your awareness, and that's okay. So you're not looking for calmness from meditation all the time.
And then the only, I agree with all that as well. I like Headspace. I've used Headspace a bit.
Yeah.
I've been a Sam Harris. I was a beta tester because I've been on his stuff for a long time.
Yeah,
so I've been using that app for a long time. But the other thing that I will say is I think it's actually worth looking up one of the podcasts. You can just search for it, Sam Harris talking about meditation, because I think meditation is one of those. Meditation is almost like the word exercise. Like it means so many different things. A lot of people will sit there and do an exercise that won't really do anything for them. There are goals for these sorts of things with exercise. Yeah, love the hat. But I think it's worth having, especially Sam Harris. I like the way he talks about it. That's what got me into meditation. Was him talking about why it's important. And I
love recently watching him be interviewed about meditation from other people, which he doesn't really do much of. Mostly he interviews people on his podcast. Yeah. He states basically he talks like 30% of the time because he lets the guest. It's obviously he's interviewing a guest. Yeah. When he's on an interview, he's talking the majority of the time because he's being interviewed for his specialty, which is this consciousness meditation conversation. So he drops more gems when he's being interviewed. And it's not that many because he doesn't do a lot of interviews, but those are I just recently went down a bit of a rabbit hole on a few of his recent, within the last year or two, talking specifically. Clearly, he's promoting his app, and it was great to kind of reinforce why we do this practice. We have an infinite, we have a non-infinite amount of time. So instead of thinking about maximizing time, we should be thinking about maximizing our awareness within the time that we're given. And I really like that approach to his thinking. That's
a really important
awareness,
thing.
Not time.
I think the thing that I've learned more from meditation than anything else is realizing how much of my life I've spent thinking about the same shit over and over and getting lost in thought and lost in trains of thought that are not productive, and being able to have a daily practice that allows you to more quickly recognize that, allows me to be more present, enjoy more of my life, be good to other people, be more focused, be a better record maker, all those sorts of things. And it comes from a practice. It's like stretching. That's why the best analogy I have for people that don't know, if you just like try to touch your toes for 5 minutes every day, within a few weeks, you'll be super flexible. And meditation sort of does a version of that for your brain, where you do practice every day. You're not supposed to be great at it. You just do it, and what it allows you to do is be more present and be more aware of things and bring a lot more richness to your life, density perhaps even.
I don't know actually, but I can see the other side of that.
Density of awareness, maybe. I don't know, I was just trying to bring it back to density.
I know,
we got about 7 minutes left. Dylan asked, do you send tracks through separate summing buses in order to do broad brushstroke moves at the end of the mix? I've started doing that more. I think it's a fairly useful thing to do. I don't know if it's super necessary, but I like doing that. I generally don't treat the buses that much. I'm trying to get things out of individual individual tracks, but I like bussing things just so I can be like, I'm gonna give a little more vocal, a little more drum, and that sort of thing. Yeah. Do you do that kind of thing? Not really.
Yeah, I don't change the balance macroly like that.
EQ.
And I don't do broad strokes at the end of the mix like that. It's integrated in. It's mostly template stuff for that purpose. So slight bit of widening on a background group versus the lead, just to get them to sit differently. Maybe a low mid controlling plugin that's on the on a keyboard or synth bus. just to give myself a handicap of control in that area, just so I don't hit my tubes too hard in that area. But that's stuff that's kind of on already and changes accordingly to the mix. It's not really Brushstroke after the fact, so I would just switch that language around. It's kind of in the template handicap zone.
Okay, cool. I like this one from Theo, which can kind of go a couple different ways, but favorite mixing and producing peers. Who do you like? Who's doing interesting things that excite you? And maybe it's peers, maybe it's people making records now, or all-time faves, or like who are the...
I'm super into Blake and Omer that did that 24 Karat record. I'm working with them on some stuff right now. They really rejuvenated my my childhood love of pop music that I feel like I lost for a bit.
That's great.
So I'm super into what they're doing right now. Guitar focused hip hop drum combinations with emo vocals on top. It's just bringing me back to when I was that age, and I don't want to sound like an old man because I'm not that much older. But it's giving me a similar feeling. Keto was just announced in the I would say I fuck with Keto real hard. OG and Volta, the homies, they're so good. Tyler Johnson, who just did Harry Styles' record with Kid Harpoon, they're both fantastic. I mean, these are the homies. I'm shouting out homies. You know, but right now, honestly, just doubling down on Blake and Omer. Those dudes are onto something new and exciting.
Record. Really cool stuff. Yeah. Really fun. I like that. I like this stuff a lot too. I think my favorite producer right now is D-Mile.
I love D-Mile. Let's add D-Mile to the list.
I don't know him. It's funny because I've posted.
He's so sweet.
I've posted a few things on my story because I was watching the Song Exploder Ty Dolla $ign thing on and they misspelled his name on the subtitles, and so I said to them about it. But I don't know him, but I'm just a huge fan of his records. He's done a bunch of the Ty Dolla $ign stuff. He's done it. He's great. D-Mile is, I think, my favorite right now. So musical.
We work together on Khalid stuff. He's fucking great.
Yeah.
His Lucky Day album that he produced, it's just fucking dumb.
The Lucky Day album is amazing.
His bass playing, it's like he's
It's very musical, but it's exciting. It doesn't sound. It's like extremely organic and musical feeling, but yet like very modern and in your face. It's really cool.
Yeah. What else we got?
Other people I like, but yeah. Miggy asked about. Just we know you don't use a lot of traditional compression, but we talked a bit about dynamic EQ. That was part of his question, multiband compression. Do you use sidechain stuff much?
Rarely, but yeah. A lot of times it's already ingrained in the track given to me and in the stem. And if it's supposed to be dramatic, and if I'm saturating a bit harder on a sound to bring life out of it, then I have to remake that sidechain because that will change the dip in the sidechain. So I'll remake it, but it's not a one side. I don't do it all the time. I haven't done it in a minute. I just try to if anything, I'll sidechain a frequency range. So I might sidechain the low end out of a sound for the kick, but specifically up to maybe 100 hertz or something, just to dip that area. So I'm not just making the sound dip, so to make room for the low end, but it's usually an arrangement choice. Yeah, and we talked a lot about dynamic EQ and multiband compression. We got about 2 minutes left, so I think we can probably just call it here. I wanted to say to people, give us suggestions on single topic stuff. I think next week we might just talk about low end because that's what I want to do and it sounds fun. You want to do that? But if other people have thoughts, definitely let us know. And now that we're getting caught up on getting the audio version of these things out. So like I said, next week we're going to have, we're going to try to basically do the live on Tuesday and then Wednesday have the full episode up on the YouTube and the full episode up on audio format. And so now we're going to try to start doing a little more promo stuff. I may go on one of actually, question for the people watching, are there particular subreddits that you guys like? There's We Are the Music Makers, there's a few other ones. Are there any of those that you guys like? Because we think we might go do an AMA on one of them, try to do some mild promotion, really just the idea to get it out to people who might find it useful. So if you guys have ideas on who we can promote to, that sort of thing, that would be great. Appreciate How do we do a live mix dissect? I like that idea. They say Mick Gazowski, but just in general, how do we do that? That could be fun.
You mean somebody else's mix?
Yeah, like let's talk about it. Let's critique it.
It's hard because I don't know the legalities of it. If we can just stream someone else's stuff, I was thinking about that too, of just like playing our favorite records on a Twitch stream or something. But I don't know if you can just play copyrighted material
On Instagram. Yeah, good point.
So, yeah. It'd be great to link up with some other mixers and people.
I think I'm going to talk to Alex soon. I think we're going to do one. I'm waiting to have Conversations podcast drop before that, and I was actually going to just say on the last minute that we have 5 episodes edited and done. We just have to do the upload process, so we're about to drop pretty soon. I'll know more next week on that. So we have 5 of 12 edited and mixed and ready to go up. So
amazing, man. We got 10 seconds left here. Love you, John. Good to see you. Thank you guys for checking out. As always, hit us up if we can be more helpful.
Bye.
Peace, guys.